These 6 people were all warned about the dangerous animals near them, and every single one of them ignored all the rules and warnings. One of them was even physically grabbed by the arm, 50 feet from a Bengal tiger he couldn't even see, and his ego still kept him going. I'm Jaxon. You're watching Animal Encounters, and without wasting any more time, let's get into it. Deshmund Acharya had been planning this trip for months. The 44-year-old garment exporter from Ahmedabad had spent a small fortune building up a wildlife photography kit, lenses, and bodies that cost more than some of the jeeps in the reserve, and he'd visited tiger reserves across India often enough to believe he understood how they worked. He booked a premium private jeep through the official allocation system at a strictly regulated reserve in Rajasthan's Aravalli foothills, paying significantly above the standard shared safari rate for an exclusive vehicle with a driver and a forest department guide. That kind of money changes how people think about the experience. I've seen it over and over. You're not just a tourist anymore, you're a client. And clients start treating safety rules like suggestions. The reserve operated under India's forest department, with checkpoints at every entry gate and a strictly enforced rule against anyone exiting a vehicle inside the boundaries. The driver had gone through the standard briefing at the gate. Staying in the jeep wasn't just a recommendation, it was the law. No exceptions. It was a warm afternoon on March 14, 2016, when the radio crackled with a sighting report. A tigress was resting in thick grass roughly 80 yards off the road. The driver pulled the jeep to the designated viewing spot, engine idling. But the grass was tall, and the tigress was barely visible, just the top of her head and her ears above the brush line. Deshmund stood up in the jeep, braced against the roll bar, and tried for a shot. Nothing usable. He told the driver to move the jeep off track for a closer angle. The driver refused immediately. So did the guide. Off-road driving was strictly prohibited, and the tigress was too concealed for a safe approach. Witnesses in the second jeep later described the whole sequence as unfolding in well under a minute. Deshmund climbed onto the side rail. The driver grabbed his arm. The guide warned him directly that stepping onto the ground near a concealed tiger could trigger an ambush. A second jeep carrying tourists had pulled up roughly 40 yards behind them, and passengers later said they could hear the argument from their vehicle. Here's the thing about tigers in these reserves. They're used to vehicles. A jeep rolling by is just part of the landscape to them, but a human being on foot at ground level, moving through tall grass, that's something entirely different. That looks like prey. The difference isn't subtle. It's the difference between a rock and a meal. Deshmund pulled free, dropped to the ground, and walked straight toward the grass where the tigress was hiding. The driver hit the horn in short bursts and revved the engine. I keep coming back to that moment. The driver is hitting the horn, revving the engine, the guide is on the radio, and Deshmund is walking away from all of it with his camera up. 3 separate warnings happening at the same time, and he's ignoring everyone. He closed to within roughly 50 feet of the tigress before the grass erupted. She came out of cover at full speed. Bengal tigers can hit 35 miles per hour in short bursts, and at that range, the gap closed before he had time to react. She drove him to the ground and went for the neck, which is typical of tiger attacks. Their canines are over 3 inches long, and a sustained bite to the throat can quickly compromise the airway. The driver kept hitting the horn and revving the engine. The guide radioed forest staff at the nearest post. Another safari jeep arrived shortly after and drove toward the scene, and the engine noise was enough to get the tigress to pull back into deeper cover. Rangers reached Deshmund somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes later. He'd taken a bite to the throat that would have caused rapid airway compromise and severe bleeding. He likely lost consciousness rapidly. He showed no signs of life when responders reached him. Still lying in the grass roughly 50 feet from a jeep he never should have left. The tourists in the second vehicle had seen parts of the Hia incident and were visibly shaken. The reserve shut down safari operations for the rest of the day. The reserve reportedly fitted the tigress with a tracking collar, but didn't destroy her. Her behavior was consistent with a natural defensive response to a human on foot approaching her resting position. The forest department ruled the death a direct result of the victim leaving the vehicle against multiple warnings. In the weeks that followed, the reserve added additional signage in Hindi and English and implemented a new policy requiring guides to physically block jeep exits if a passenger attempted to disembark near a sighting. 50 feet. He walked 50 feet from safety into the kill zone of a predator he couldn't even see for a photograph. I've sat with that number for a while now, and it still doesn't make sense to me. I think about that driver more than I think about Desmond. Hands on the wheel, engine screaming, watching a man walk towards something he couldn't stop. That kind of helplessness sticks with you. The next one is different though. No driver, no guide, no horn. Just one man, 30 miles from the nearest settlement, with a rifle he never took out of the bag. Here's something most people don't know about Svalbard. It's a Norwegian archipelago about 600 miles north of the mainland, and polar bears outnumber humans there. The law doesn't just recommend that you carry protection outside the settlements. You're required to carry effective deterrence, which in practice is usually a rifle. Torbjorn Vikdal, a 37-year-old freelance photographer from Tromsø, knew the rule. He'd been to Svalbard twice before, both times with organized groups and armed guides. But in August 14th, 2015, he wanted to do a solo 5-day trek along the western coast to photograph glacial formations on his own schedule. No group, no guide, no schedule, just him. He rented a bolt-action rifle from an outfitter in Longyearbyen before heading out, standard procedure for solo travelers. The outfitter offered a familiarization session on the weapon. Vikdal turned it down, said he'd handled rifles before. He turned it down. A 10-minute session on the one piece of equipment that could save his life in a place where the apex predator has no fear of humans, and he said no thanks. That decision is the one I keep coming back to. On the third night, he set up camp on a gravel beach about 30 miles from the nearest settlement. The terrain along that stretch of coast is flat and exposed, with clear sight lines in every direction. No trees, no structures, just rock and gravel and the ocean. The kind of place where you'd think you could see trouble coming. But polar bears don't always announce themselves. His tent was 60 feet from the shoreline, which put it directly on a natural travel corridor that polar bears use to move along the coast. These corridors are well mapped. The outfitters in Longyearbyen will show you exactly where they run if you ask. Vikdal either didn't ask or didn't care. He also didn't set up a tripwire perimeter alarm. That's a basic precaution that the local authorities recommend for anyone camping in bear country. It's a few ounces of wire and some noisemakers that go off if anything large crosses the line. He didn't bother. It would have taken 5 minutes to set up and weighed almost nothing in his pack. Here's what makes polar bears different from almost every other bear on the planet. They don't fear humans. A brown bear or a black bear will usually avoid you. A polar bear will walk toward you, circle your camp, study you. They investigate unfamiliar things as potential food. Males regularly exceed 1,000 pounds, and they can pick up scent over long distances, especially with favorable wind. And when they commit to an attack, they go for the head and neck with a bite powerful enough to cause catastrophic trauma to the skull and spine. Norwegian authorities reconstructed the scene afterward. The bear came in from the shoreline during the early morning hours. Svalbard has perpetual daylight in August, so visibility wasn't the issue. The bear could see the tent clearly. It just didn't matter. Tracks suggested the bear had circled the tent more than once before tearing through the fabric. The rifle was found inside the tent, still zipped in its carrying case. Still in the case. That's the detail I can't get past. He carried that rifle for 3 days and never once took it out of the bag. The only thing that could have saved him was packed away like luggage while a 1,000-pound predator circled his tent. The damage to the campsite was consistent with a sustained attack. Vikdal never got to the rifle. A passing vessel later noticed the damaged campsite and reported it. Responders reached the site by helicopter. The official cause of death was massive trauma to the head and upper body. In this case, authorities tracked and euthanized the bear 3 days later. 3 mistakes stacked on top of each other, and any one of them undone probably changes the outcome. I find that harder to sit with than a single catastrophic error, because it means this was survivable. It just wasn't survived. But the next story only had one mistake. One rule broken, and the rule couldn't have been simpler. Don't go in the water after dark. That was the rule at a small eco-lodge built on stilts along the Tapajos River in Para State, deep in the Brazilian Amazon. Remote, quiet, surrounded by water on 3 sides. The lodge hosted maybe a dozen international visitors at a time. No fences, no barriers between the buildings and the river. The lead guide, a 48-year-old local man who'd grown up on the river, made the rule clear during every orientation. He'd point to the river from the dock and say the same thing to every new group. During the day, this is your river. After dark, it belongs to them. Crivaldo Soares was a 31-year-old environmental studies graduate student from Lisbon, Portugal. He'd come to the lodge in late October 26, 2017, during a gap between academic terms, doing informal field observations. The staff liked him. He was smart, curious, and knew his tropical ecology. But the guides noticed something about Crivaldo that made them uneasy. His confidence around Amazonian wildlife felt like it was running ahead of his actual experience. That gap between knowledge and experience is something I think about a lot in these stories. Crivaldo could probably name every species in that river. He'd studied the food chains, the predator behavior, the seasonal patterns, and somehow all of that information made him feel safer instead of more careful. On his fourth night, the heat was unbearable. He'd spent the day hiking and came back soaked in sweat. The lodge had no air conditioning, just river breezes and ceiling fans. The generator had shut off at 10, and by midnight, the only sounds were insect and the slow current against the stilt. Other guests saw him leave his room and walk down the wooden stairs to the floating dock with a towel. He stepped off the dock into the shallows. The water was warm. The river moved slowly past the dock pilings. A guest in a nearby room heard what may have been a short shout, then a burst of violent splashing that lasted only seconds. Then the river went quiet. By the time the guide reached the dock with a spotlight, the surface had settled flat. Crivaldo was gone. That silence. The splashing stops and the water just goes still, like nothing happened. Every time I read about a water attack, that's the part that gets to me. The river doesn't care. It just closes over and moves on. What happened beneath the surface follows a pattern that's well documented with black caiman. These are the largest aquatic predators in the Amazon. Big males can reach 16 feet and over 800 pounds, and their dark coloring makes them almost invisible in the murky water of tributary channels. They hunt by ambush, lying still near the bank until something enters the water. The strike is fast and lateral. Jaws clamp on, and then the caiman drags the victim into deeper water. Victims often drown during the initial drag, sometimes before any rolling behavior begins. Search teams launched at first light. Fishermen and wildlife officers combed the tributary in canoes, checking the banks and probing submerged debris. Within the next day or two, they recovered partial remains about half a mile downstream, caught against a submerged root system. The injuries were consistent with a large caiman attack. Drowning during the initial drag was the most likely cause of death. Crivaldo's towel was still on the dock where he'd left it. His sandals were at the bottom of the stairs. One rule: stay out of the river after dark. He knew it, understood it, and went in anyway. I find myself thinking about the guide walking down to that dock with his spotlight, scanning flat water where a person used to be standing. A towel on the dock, and a quiet river. That's all that was left by morning. What happened next, though, didn't play out in the dark or on a remote river. It happened on a crowded road, in broad daylight, with people screaming at her to stop. Cars were stopped bumper to bumper on a mountain road outside Brasov, Romania. It was September 17th, 2016, and the Carpathian foothills were doing what they'd done every tourist season for years. Bears had wandered out of the tree line to pick through garbage left by motorists, and people had pulled over to watch. It happens so often along these roads that locals barely slow down anymore. The road had yellow warning signs in Romanian, English, German, and Hungarian. Pictograms of bears. Do not approach. Do not feed. The signs had been there for years and made no difference whatsoever. Within a few dozen feet of the road, an adult female brown bear weighing somewhere between 300 and 400 pounds sat calmly at the forest edge, working through scattered food scraps. Some tourists snapped pictures from behind open car doors. Locals walking by gave the bear plenty of room. A few of them shouted warnings at anyone drifting too close. This is the part of Romania where brown bears have become a roadside fixture. Generations of tourists feeding them from their cars have created animals that tolerate people at a distance, but will absolutely turn violent if you push into their space. It's not a predatory response, it's defensive. But when a bear that size charges from 12 feet away, the distinction doesn't matter much. Milena Kohokaru was a 28-year-old social media coordinator from Bucharest who'd driven up to the Carpathians for a long weekend. Her accounts were full of close-range wildlife selfies from previous trips, mostly deer and foxes across European parks. She'd posted her itinerary ahead of time, promising her followers content with the famous roadside bears. That promise is a detail that sticks with me. She'd already told people what she was going to do before she even got there. The content was committed to before she ever saw the bear. I think that matters more than people realize. Her friend stayed in the car and watched through the windshield. A Romanian man standing nearby yelled at her to stop. Milena waved him off without turning around. Phone held out in front of her in selfie mode, closing the distance to the bear one step at a time. She was smiling. You could see it in the way she held the phone. The animal had been watching her approach, glancing up without retreating. That tolerance is the trap. It looks like the bear is fine with you being there. What it actually means is you haven't crossed the line yet. Habituated bears have a threshold, and they don't always warn you when you're approaching it. They go from sitting still to full violence in a heartbeat, and the switch is proximity. When Milena stepped to within about 12 feet, the line moved. The bear went from stationary to full contact in a single burst. The first swipe hit her across the upper body and knocked her off her feet. The bear followed up with repeated blows from both forepaws and bit at her head and neck. The attack was brief, likely lasting only seconds, before the bear pulled back and walked into the trees. Defensive aggression. She'd made her point and left, but 30 seconds was more than enough. By the time other tourists reached Milena, the damage was obvious. Massive trauma to the head and neck. Paramedics were called, but the winding mountain road meant a long wait. She was unresponsive when the ambulance arrived and did not survive the transport to the hospital. 12 feet. I've measured that out, and it's barely 2 body lengths. She closed to within 12 feet of a wild bear, with her back to it for a selfie, and the bear gave her exactly one warning, which was none at all. Afterward, local officials pushed again for crackdowns on roadside feeding and garbage disposal, the same recommendation they'd made before and would make again. The bear was never pursued. She'd reacted the way any habituated bear would when pushed past its threshold. Everyone else at that pullout drove home fine. Same bear, same afternoon, same road. The only difference was one decision. That's the margin in every one of these stories, and I don't think it ever stops being unsettling. Now, what makes the next story different from everything so far is the darkness. Total, complete darkness on a path that an entire village had already told him to stay off of. For 2 weeks leading up to January 9th, 2014, something had been killing livestock at farms near a small village in the buffer zone south of Chitwan National Park. Goats mostly. The kills were clean and consistent, and the pug marks found along a footpath between the village and a neighboring settlement belonged to a male leopard. Wildlife authorities issued a nighttime curfew. Nobody in, nobody out after sunset. The footpath was considered especially dangerous. Villagers who normally walked between the 2 settlements after dinner stopped doing so entirely. Farmers brought their livestock inside earlier. The village felt different after dark, quieter, tighter. Everyone knew what was out there. Leopards are built for exactly this kind of hunting. They weigh between 65 and 175 pounds depending on the individual, but pound for pound, they're one of the most dangerous predators on the planet. They hunt almost entirely at night, and their method is ambush. They come from behind or from above with no warning sound at all. By the time you know a leopard is there, it's already on you. In the Chitwan buffer zone, attacks on humans have been documented, particularly during nighttime hours. Dipesh Tamang, a 34-year-old trekking guide from Kathmandu, had been staying at a small guest house in the village for 3 days as part of a walking tour of the lowlands. He'd been to Chitwan twice before and figured he knew the area well enough. The guest house owner, a 60-year-old woman who had lived in the village her entire life, had explained the curfew to him clearly on his first night. The livestock kills, the pug marks, the wildlife authorities' warning. She'd told him the footpath to the next village was off limits after dark. She told him twice. She told him, "That's what gets me." Not a sign, not a pamphlet. A person, face to face, explaining to him exactly what was out there and exactly why he shouldn't go. And he heard her and decided it didn't apply to him. On his 3rd evening, Dipesh told her he was walking the footpath to meet a contact in the next village who could arrange a canoe trip for the following morning. She told him to wait until sunrise. He said the animals avoid humans, grabbed a small flashlight from his bag, and left around 7:30 p.m. The guest house owner watched him walk walk out the door and down the road toward the tree line. She didn't follow him. What else could she do? She left the front light on and sat down at the kitchen table to wait. The path ran about 1.5 miles through farmland and patches of dense sal forest. Some sections were under full canopy where no moonlight reached the ground. In those stretches, the flashlight beam was the only light for hundreds of yards in any direction. A small cone of white surrounded by absolute darkness on every side. The village and safety were behind him. Ahead was 1 mile of darkness on a trail that the leopard responsible for the livestock kills was using as a hunting route. Depeche never made it to the next village. Wildlife officers reconstructed the scene the following morning after the guest house owner reported him missing. His flashlight was found on the path, still switched on, about 1/2 mile from the guest house. The pug marks at the site matched the same leopard that had been killing livestock. The physical evidence suggested a clear sequence. The leopard came from behind and slightly above, probably launching from a raised tree root or low embankment along the trail. First contact was the neck and the back of the head. Drag marks led a short distance off the path into thick undergrowth. Death was likely very quick. Throat bite, suffocation. The flashlight still being on is the detail that won't leave me. It was just sitting there on the trail, beam pointing into the trees. He didn't even get the chance to drop it. One second he was walking, and the next second it was over. They found his remains in the undergrowth by midday. The leopard was captured in a cage trap a few days later and removed from the area. Wildlife authorities classified its behavior as natural predation on a human who'd entered its active hunting territory at night. That's not a rogue animal. That's an animal doing what it does, in its own territory, in the dark, to a person who'd been warned not to be there. The guest house owner had waited up that night. She already knew. I wonder sometimes whether people like her feel guilt or anger, or just the exhaustion of being right about something nobody listened to. This last one is the story I've spent the most time with, not because it's the most violent, because it's the simplest. A short walk, a cold night, a staff member doing his job, and one man who decided none of it mattered. The fire pit at the center of the boma was burning low. It was July 24th, 2018, at a small safari lodge in Zimbabwe's Matabeleland South Province, one of those places where the concession borders unfenced wilderness, and the bush just starts right outside the cleared perimeter. You could hear hyenas calling in the distance most nights. Winter nights in that part of the country drop into the low 40s, and most of the guests had gathered around the fire after dinner. A couple from the UK, a solo traveler from Cape Town, and Whitfield holding court. Garamond Whitfield was on his 4th or 5th glass of wine. The 56-year-old retired insurance executive from Johannesburg had booked a 5-night photographic safari at the lodge, and he'd spent most of his stay letting the staff know how familiar he was with the African bush. Grew up in it, he kept saying. Knew the wildlife, didn't need anyone looking after him. Other guests at the boma that evening would later describe him as loud, friendly, and visibly drunk. The lodge had a strict rule. After dark, any guest moving between their cabin and the main lodge needed an armed escort. It wasn't a complicated arrangement. You'd radio the front desk, a ranger would walk over with a rifle and a flashlight, and he'd walk you to your door and wait until you were inside. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. The rule was explained at check-in, printed on cards in each cabin, and repeated by staff every evening. Whitfield's cabin was about 200 yards from the boma, along an unpaved path that passed through scattered mopane scrub. 200 yards. Maybe a 2-minute walk. 200 yards. I keep turning that number over. Less than 2 football fields. A walk so short you wouldn't think twice about it at home. But this wasn't home. This was unfenced lion country in the middle of the night. Around 10:30, Whitfield said he was heading to bed. A staff member offered to call the armed escort. Whitfield waved him off. The staff member pushed. Lions had been heard calling from less than a mile away earlier that evening. Whitfield laughed, said he didn't need a babysitter, and walked out into the dark. The pathway lights ran out about 30 yards past the boma. After that, the trail was pitch black, with mopane scrub pressing in on both sides at head height. No moon that night. The kind of darkness where you can't see your own feet. Here's the thing about lions at night. Their eyes are significantly more sensitive in low light than ours. A person stumbling down a dark path can't see 10 feet ahead. A lion sitting in that same scrub can see everything. And when individual lions or small groups are moving through their territory after dark, they investigate sounds and movement. It's not always a coordinated hunt. Sometimes it's just curiosity with 400 pounds of muscle behind it. A charge from close range covers the distance faster than any human can react in the dark, and the kill typically comes from a suffocating grip to the throat. He laughed. I keep getting stuck on that. The staff member told him there were lions out there, and he laughed. Not defiance, not frustration. He genuinely thought it was funny, and then he walked into the dark. The scene reconstruction filled in the rest as best it could. Whitfield made it about 150 yards down the path before the encounter. Track patterns in the sandy soil suggested more than one lion, likely a female and a younger animal, moving through the concession along a route that happened to cross the cabin trail. Evidence suggested the attack came from the scrub beside the path. Fast, from the side. He went down and never got back up. The bite went to the throat, a sustained hold that cut off his air, little evidence of a prolonged struggle. His wine glass was found nearby, intact in the sand. The glass didn't break. He's gone, and the glass is just sitting there in the sand, without a crack on it. That image is the one I can't put down. Something about the glass surviving what he didn't just crystallizes the whole thing for me. A staff member heard a disturbance from the direction of the cabins and raised the alarm immediately. The armed escort team got there as fast as they could, rifles and spotlights cutting through the scrub. The lions had already pulled back into the bush. Whitfield was on the path with injuries consistent with a fatal throat bite that would have quickly cut off his airway. The whole thing was likely over very quickly. The other guests at the boma that night were escorted back to their cabins under armed guard, most of them in silence. The lodge cooperated fully with the inquiry. Their protocols were documented, the staff member's attempt to stop Whitfield was corroborated, and the lodge was cleared. The lions were left alone. They'd been moving through their own territory at night and encountered an unescorted person walking through the scrub. That isn't unusual behavior for a lion moving through its territory at night. The thing I keep sitting with after all of these is how simple survival would have been. Stay in the Jeep, set up the tripwire, don't get in the water, stay behind the car door, wait until morning, take the 2-minute escort. None of it was complicated, none of it was expensive, and none of it was done.